What if I told you they are simple mistakes that companies make over and over again, and that you might be making some of them too? But if they're so simple, why do they keep happening?
The CEO doesn't want to be the CRO. They don't want to go and tackle these problems. They tell their leaders, hey, marketing, you go figure it out. Hey, sales, you go figure it out. Even though they don't have the same goals, the same incentives, the same comp packages, they're rowing in different directions because that's how they're being incentivized to operate.
That's Eddie Reynolds from Union Square Consulting. From bad lead routing and MQL definitions to having no true revenue leader, he says there are 7 problems $10 to $100 million companies constantly fumble with.
Let's just think about how messed up the standard practice is for routing inbound leads. Somebody comes to our website, they're deeply interested, they're our ideal customer. They go to the website and they click a button that says request a demo. We route them directly to the most junior, inexperienced person in our entire company, an inbound SDR. We take the most valuable lead we could possibly get and give it to the person least experienced and qualified to work that lead.
In this episode of The Revenue Formula, we cover what you need to know to avoid these mistakes and some more. Enjoy. So our printer broke today.
That's really what we're going to
that's
open
the
with
introduction,
today.
but kind of our printer broke today, and so we now need to use a phone.
Oh, that's right.
So this is not, we're not slacking, while you're talking. We're actually kind of looking at our notes on the phone. Just
As
so
if you're going to look at it anyway. You're just going to, you're going to sidetrack.
blaze through
Eddie
it.
is going to say something, and you're just going to run with it, and I then need to salvage this whole operation afterwards. That's usually what happens here.
I like the look of it. I think it's cool. Like, you guys have the desk showing, you've got your notes. I actually just bought a new lens that the audience probably doesn't care about that goes super wide, so I can do the same thing. I like it.
Yeah,
no, absolutely. And we also have, Mikkel worked on an introduction today, haven't you?
Yeah, I did my homework, and I was basically, and I said this off air, but Tony has been really difficult to work with to get this particular episode in the bag. And what was really pleasant was I got to chat with Sarah on your team, Eddie, who is, gotta say, pretty awesome. We both avoided jinxing this episode. We talked about, apparently there's a battle going on. I'm European, so I wouldn't know this. But there's a battle going on in the States between Chicago and New York around who has the best pizza, right?
There's no battle.
No, and I was kind of thinking,
what battle are we talking about?
So which side are you on, Eddie?
I'm on the side that likes real pizza, not bread bowl soup.
So that's a really nice way of not answering.
Yes.
Like, is it Chicago or New York?
New York.
Yeah, okay. I didn't get that hint. So it's just for those European listeners.
John
Okay,
Stewart has a very, very great skit on this where he just goes off on Chicago pizza because it is basically a bread bowl filled with tomato sauce. It's disgusting. And
It's a
I
pie.
grew up near Chicago. I grew up near Chicago. But I don't know. I spent the last 13 years in New York, and New York pizza is great. I also spent a lot of time in Italy, in Naples specifically. I like pizza.
Yeah.
I like all kinds of pizza, but not Chicago deep dish pizza. It's not pizza.
Why did you spend time in Italy? Like just vacationing, or what did you do?
I did a gap year, which I know is a very un-American thing to do.
Wow.
And I spent a year in Europe, 4 months in France, 7-8 months in Italy, a few months backpacking around. One of my closest friends that I met from there, who now lives in Colorado near me where I live, is from Denmark. Got to go see the Hamlet Castle and everything. Had some good times. Spent a lot of time in Germany. Love Germany.
What a cultured American.
I like this Eddie guy already.
Has a passport.
Yeah. And by the way, I also just got to say, if you're listening and working with Eddie and you're based out of Chicago, this is no reason to now go and cancel the engagement. It's just not. Don't fight over pizza. It's great. But I just want to latch on to one thing you said, which is like it's kind of a bread soup, right? And we're going to now transition.
We're still with the pizza.
We're still with the pizza.
Okay,
we're not going to transition into what we're going to talk about, which is all 3 of us here. We've talked and worked at probably SaaS companies, B2B. There's at least a few cases where you look at how things are being run and you think about that kind of concept of it's just a big bowl of soup and it's all a mess, right?
Wow.
That's kind of what we're going to dig into, or at least sink our teeth into today. We're going to talk a bit about basically the challenges we've seen, especially companies between 10 and 100 million ARR kind of make over and over again.
Yes.
And this was kind of inspired by the LinkedIn post you did. We'll drop it in the show notes for the listeners to check out. And I'm kind of hoping maybe you want to kick us off with Like, what is the first thing that comes to mind? One of the biggest mistakes some of these companies make, Eddie?
Ooh, the biggest mistake. I don't know, which one is the biggest one? Give me a moment to think about this. All right, I'm going to go with the last one on my list, which is no true revenue leader. And so I'll also expand on this when we talk about companies with $10 to $100 million in revenue. I'm drawing that line because below $10 million in revenue, you might be able to get away without having all of this stuff in place. Maybe you've got a VP of sales and you're just going after new business and you're crushing it, and marketing isn't perfect yet and CS isn't perfect yet. You're making it work. You get past the 10 million, especially into 20 or 30, and this is where stuff starts to really, really fall apart. By the time you get to 100 million, hopefully you've worked this out, but we've seen a lot of companies that are north of 100 million, north of $1 billion that still have these problems. So I'll clarify that. But this no true revenue leader is a real thing, because the issue is when you have a sales leader that's focused on sales and a marketing leader focused on marketing and a CS leader focused on retention and growth. By definition, they're operating in their own silos and they're going to see the world differently. They oftentimes have different definitions of things, different data, different systems. And so when we ask a simple question like, how are leads converting into revenue? The sales leader has one answer, the marketing leader has another. If you don't have a true revenue leader in place, then what that means is that you as the CEO are the CRO. You are now the CRO whether you like it or not. And the unfortunate reality that we have seen with a lot of the work that we've done is we're trying to fix these problems and the CEO doesn't want to be the CRO. They don't want to go and tackle these problems. They don't want to have a conversation about how leads make it through the sales funnel. They tell their leaders, hey, marketing, you go figure it out. Hey, sales, you go figure it out. Even though they don't have the same goals, the same incentives, the same comp packages, they're rowing in different directions because that's how they're being incentivized to operate.
So I think this is a really good one. And what is, and let's kind of riff on this a little bit, because I think there's more and more like a controversial take kind of happening. So number one, to your point, you would probably say like, folks, you need a CRO, and we can even debate what a CRO is, right? And kind of even for the ones that have a CRO, is that actually what you're talking about when you say a true revenue leader, right? Then the next thing is like people are saying, well, those guys are not figuring this out anyway, so why do we need to have a CRO to begin with? And let's just, try and kind of have the CFO kind of run this thing somehow and just, upskill his go-to-market skills a little bit. And riffing on top of all of that, so let's kind of see where we're going with this here, because thanks for the wonderful, script that we want to talk about today, Mikkel. I think because it's all, out of the window. But Mikkel and I actually yesterday were kind of discussing, well, we understand it's really difficult to have the CRO and the right person in there.
Yeah.
We understand that they're being thrown out every 12 months anyway. And therefore, maybe it makes even continuity sense to have the CFO, overseeing some of this. But
I actually like the CFO a lot, by the way.
So let me finish my long-winded point here.
It'll be a couple minutes.
Yeah,
Eddie.
we'll fix it in post. But basically, the thinking was, could you actually have someone that ticks some of those revenue leader boxes that we're all thinking about, but not actually owning each of these departments? And I don't want to make like an awkward pitch for revenue operations, but could you be a successful CRO, think about it like this, but without actually being this, the boss, the manager of VP marketing, VP sales, VP CS, right? Can you be successful in aligning the go-to-market without necessarily leading all of those people? And would love to have your take on this, Eddie.
Let me pose a simple question. How are you measuring, judging, and incentivizing marketing? If you hire a marketing leader and you say your number one job is to generate more MQLs, this is how you're going to get your bonus, this is how you're going to, get recognition in the company, this is how you're going to maintain your job security. What do you do with that?
Well, you'll probably get a lot of webinar leads.
I was going to say, I'm going to get rich in that job.
And well, even that requires skill, Mikkel, I'm sorry. But then the other thing is, you'll have all of those MQL definition conversations, all of that jazz. But, you don't have the conversation of, well, which of those is actually generating cash, right? Because that is now suddenly someone else's problem, right? You have this throwing this over the wall kind of sensation. I guess that's also kind of what you're thinking about here, Eddie.
It is. And I don't have a CMO. I have a marketing manager and she's wonderful. And I have created her comp plan and I've split it two ways. One is inbound revenue generated and the other is total revenue generated. regardless of where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, and we have this problem ourselves where we have a strong definition of MQLs. For us, an MQL is you raise your hand and you ask to speak to sales. That's it. Like, it's a pretty strict definition. And unfortunately for us, even that's not working. We're not seeing high enough conversion rates. And what's great about this, by incentivizing my marketing manager correctly, she's rolling up her sleeves. She's like digging into this. How do we solve for this problem? Because there is nothing in her comp plan that says anything about generating a certain number of MQLs. And so she's sitting here working alongside me going, how do we get more leads from the right companies that are more likely to convert for us?
Mm-hmm. I think that always seems like the right fix, right? Kind of, let's just have the marketing leader be incentivized by a specific revenue number. But I can also 100% see that, well, you know, those sales bozos, they're just not giving them, you know, all, and kind of they are kind of screwing up the conversion. I can't get fired because of my VP of sales, or the VP of sales is not doing his or her job, right? So I think in some of those, you know, as you grow up and you will have more detailed kind of, you know, goals, I think some of this sometimes breaks. What I then sometimes actually think, and this is where this idea of like, well, and again, it doesn't need to be necessarily be revenue operations, but someone actually being in charge of trying to kind of get those silos together, you probably could live with, you know, an abstraction and say like, well, you're going to get incentivized on hand raiser MQLs. And then there's maybe another kind of piece of incentivization coming as well. But basically kind of saying like, there's no fluffiness in the MQL definition. You know, we need to have, you know, demo request. This is what we need to get from you. And maybe kind of build a target set around that potentially.
Can I go on a little bit of a rant here?
Well, I'm ranting the whole time. So yeah, you're totally open. Yeah, of course.
All right. So for context, I've spent my entire career, in fact, more than my entire career, in sales. I paid my way through college in commission sales. So I'm like going on like 25 years. I don't know. I can't count. Anyway, I've been in sales a long time. I still sell every single day. There's this concept that marketing is like, we don't have control. I hate to break this to anybody listening that's in marketing. I don't have control either. I don't have the ability to put a gun to somebody's head to force them to sign a contract. We are all influencing revenue. We do not have full control. So if you're generating leads and you're handing them to the sales team and they're not following up with them, there's a number of problems around that. But this idea that like I need to stop at the lead because I don't have control is something I have a huge point of contention with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just got to say, if you know, the level of control is actually pretty big if you are in the marketing department. What I would do is I would look at who is getting my inbound ups. And I would get pissed if it went to the wrong person because I knew that person had a lower win rate, right? So even there, you have at least influence. You don't necessarily have the control, but you do have influence, at least internally, over some of the processes. But
and if I could just go like a step further on this, for anybody listening that's in marketing, I should expand on what I mean when I say we don't have control. In the modern B2B buying cycle, we're seeing 10 or 15 different people that are influencing the decision, most of whom we never have the opportunity to even speak with. So this concept of control, like those folks might see our marketing content. They're familiar with our brand or they're not. They are getting feedback in these private Slack channels from our customers, from people that have had interactions with our company. There are so many things influencing these decisions. There's what's happening in the economy. There's interest rates, et cetera. So this idea that like an account executive, if they just do everything right, they can close the deal, is just a fallacy. Mm-hmm. And marketing has all this incredible influence over the entire cycle, from the very first impression all the way to winning a customer, to retaining and growing a customer. I don't know if I want to say just as much as sales, maybe more than sales, maybe less. It depends. But we're all in this like team effort together, and no one person has ultimate control over the outcome.
And to kind of tie the knot, fully here, or kind of to complete the loop, I mean, this would be solved by having a revenue leader, right? Kind of that's a little bit also kind of your hypothesis here, saying this is one of the symptoms that you probably would be seeing if you don't have, let's call that person a CRO.
That's exactly it. So CRO, CFO, CEO, somebody with the power and the time and the interest in solving this problem. So let's paint a classic example. We're having this conversation with either the head of marketing or the head of sales, and they're saying this is the problem. Leads are being handed over to sales and they're not being followed up on because sales doesn't believe that these leads are valuable. Okay, well, how would we solve for that? Well, first we need to figure out, Are these leads worth following up on? Sales has their opinion, marketing has their opinion. How can we objectively look at this? What is it that reps are doing if they're not calling these inbound leads? Well, they should be doing outbound prospecting. And I'm a huge fan of an account-based approach, and we can get into that if you want. But we're like comparing, like, okay, we're paying sales reps to pick up the phone and call people or send emails or LinkedIn DMs or whatever. But we're paying them to get in front of people that do not explicitly want to speak with them. Who should they be calling? How are these leads converting? And so when marketing is saying, well, none of the salespeople want to call our leads, and we look at it and we say, well, and I was on a call this morning going over this data with one of our customers, 0.4% of these leads are converting into revenue. 0.4%. This is why they don't want to call them. However, how do we solve for this? Well, which of these leads are converting? If we slice these in different buckets, maybe, and I'm not talking about high intent leads where people request a demo. I'm talking about the people that don't want to talk to sales. But maybe they've hit the pricing page 3 times in the last 24 hours, and that shoots them to the top of the list. And now we look at that bucket of leads and we find, oh, wow, like 5%, 10% of them convert to revenue. These are the leads salespeople should be calling, and this other stuff is junk. This other stuff should not be going to sales at all. But how do you solve for that if I am working directly with the VP of sales who doesn't have any control or oversight over this?
Yeah.
Now, if the CFO has the ability to come in and say, hey, look, like this is how we're going to fix this problem, great. If the CFO has these go-to-market shops, so to speak, and they're ultimately the ones making the financial decisions, and they're saying, I'm not paying sales reps to call down on leads that convert at 0.4%, then great, we can solve that problem together.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there is a lot of power in just, we've talked about unblending even the numbers, which is kind of what you're talking to here. And I think, we've indirectly also talked about the lead quality, so maybe we don't go too deep there, but that's especially also an area where you do want to pay attention to where are your money basically being spent and what are they yielding, right? So I think another interesting piece that you kind of noted down, especially in the sales realm, it's the who gets what leads. You kind of mentioned this a little bit. Yeah. And then also the compensation, which we kind of talked about. That's also another kind of, gosh, we get a lot of questions about comp plans even, right? So should we kind of open the door to that?
I would love to talk about the routing thing, actually. I think it's super easy to take almost like a completely different perspective on this, by the way. So I'd love to hear what you think about that, Eddie.
Well, let's just think about how messed up the standard practice is for routing inbound leads, right? So somebody comes to our website, they're deeply interested, they're our ideal customer, they're the right buyer persona, we've got a CXO in our perfect customer account, and they go to the website and they click a button that says request a demo. And we take that person and we route them directly to the most junior, inexperienced person in our entire company, an inbound SDR, because this is the learning ground where people cut their teeth in sales, and we take the most valuable lead we could possibly get and give it to the person least experienced and qualified to work that lead.
Yes. And so this is so funny. I think very few people talk about it like this and think about it like that. So we actually, and this is 10 years ago or something like this, like, Falcon times. It's like
back
always
in the day.
It's always those stories. But we had exactly that conversation. We were kind of saying like, wait a minute, we're spending like $4 million a year on marketing, and we're leveraging all of that spend through the most junior people we can find. I think that's really silly, actually. And what we did instead, we created like, it was a career path to go from outbound SDR to become an inbound SDR, right? And because it's so difficult, I mean, you're probably going to talk about, well, it should go to the AEs and let's have that conversation. But back then, some of those routing tools kind of didn't exist, and you needed to have that, quick check-in call basically. And we gave it to someone that at least had been like 6 or 9 months in the sales role in the company. And the reason why they took it, despite this being a little bit like a dead end kind of role, but the reason why they took it is just the quality of life is so much higher in that role compared to like a hardcore outbound role, right? So we had actually the best people from the SDR team that didn't want to become AEs actually apply for we call this the marketing development rep role that was taking, working through those inbounds.
I love that. My only point of contention is that oftentimes people come into sales and into an organization starting in the inbound SDR role. But if you're telling me that you've got these experienced people that really like taking inbound leads, it's great. And there's an issue with this, right? I would vote for let's send this to the most experienced AE possible.
Yeah.
But there is a problem, and it depends on what kind of lead we're talking about. Lead response time is immensely important.
Yep.
If you wait a half an hour to respond to somebody, a half an hour, I'm not talking 2 or 3 days, which is unfortunately very common, or 2 or 3 hours, just a half an hour, your chance of converting that lead goes down exponentially from getting back to them within 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And so there is this balancing act of like, well, this person maybe just filled out a form or requested some information. They're most likely blocking a half an hour or so before their next call to go explore you and a number of your direct competitors. And the first person that gets back to them will book a meeting, and most of the time will win that deal, no matter what your product is or what you do.
Yeah. And I think kind of, so where's this coming from? Let's send it to the most junior reps. I think Salesforce came up with that. At least kind of everyone is referencing, hey, I think this is how Salesforce is doing. I think we should do it like this as well. Is that, I mean, you were at Salesforce. Is that actually true? What do you think about this?
Probably. I mean, I didn't have a strong interaction with our inbound SDRs. They were literally across the country, but that's my perception. You call the 800 number, whatever, you got an inbound rep, and that person's job was just qualifying the deal and seeing if it was worth our time. I will say though, like, yeah, I mean, when I was at Salesforce, one of the biggest complaints we got consistently from customers was around this idea that they're handed off from one person to the next, and the AE is rotated around. And so, you know, they would go from like the inbound SDR qualifying it, then I would requalify it as an AE, then I'd bring my SE in, and then they would requalify it again. And this person is just like, are you kidding me? Like, when can I see the effing demo?
Yeah. And I mean, so I think this is kind of a playbook that has been copied a lot, by the way. And I'm not quite sure if we have figured out the solution to this. I think there's a new hope that AI will kind of solve this by way of helping this rep to go full cycle from, you know, throughout basically the full customer journey, also being a CSM. But let's see if we're actually gonna get there. But since we're on the
well, wait,
sales,
can I tell you a story on this real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think this is hilarious. So I think that I bought into this sort of like efficiency concept for a brief period of time. And I was trying to figure out, how do I do an inbound qualification call in 15 minutes, right? And I'm like, I need to go and I need to talk to this person to figure out who the decision maker is and what their budget is and authority and need. And I need to do it all in 15 minutes, and I need to jump off the phone. And I'm just going to like dead this thing out if it's not qualified and move on, because I am ruthless and I'm going to like crush my quota, right? And I remember talking to my boss about this, and he just looked at me like I was the dumbest person he's ever met. And he's like, Eddie, you're getting like maybe 2 inbound leads a month if you're lucky. Why are you so obsessed with making this an efficient process?
Yes. I think this is a whole different way to look at this, by the way. But since we are kind of on the topic of AEs and all kind of working through this, what's your, I mean, the topic of AEs is so funny. There are like 1,000 things. But from your perspective, you know, for companies 10 to 100 million, what are they getting wrong most of the time in actually setting up a good AE team or making this successful?
Oh, I think it's just like there's a lot of steps skipped. I mean, so like, you know, the common problems is, you know, you want to go build a sales team and you go and say like, let's go hire the top rep from the company that looks like us, the Salesforce of the world or whatever, the person that crushed their quota. And, you know, first and foremost, like we don't have any real interview process where we reverse engineer the success criteria for the role. And we really look for what that success criteria is in a rep. Instead, we're just poaching people from Salesforce because they're going to be great because they bring a playbook, right?
Yeah.
As if they invented the playbook while they worked at Salesforce. So that's part of it. The other part is like, I think it's just a lack of planning. So we don't do a capacity plan. So we don't really know like, okay, how much pipeline can we really expect to come from inbound and how much pipeline needs to come from outbound? And what does that look like? How much time in the day does it take to work those inbound leads, to prospect those outbound leads, to generate the pipeline that we need, to get the close rate, the ASP, the sales cycle, et cetera, to hit quota. And so then we create these quotas and these targets out of thin air because like our investor told us we had to triple, double, whatever. And we hire all these AEs and we've got like, we see this with the data across the market. Like what is quota attainment right now? Like 45% across the industry. It's awful.
Digging deeper into this actually, where do you think this is coming from? Is this a finance thing? It's so easy to blame the finance folks with this one, by the way. But like, do you believe this is a CFO? Okay, we need to add 10 million. You know, we have 1 million per head. so we need to add 10 folks. Do you think that this is where this is coming from?
I don't know. It's really interesting. Like, yeah, it's really easy to like shit all over the CFO, right? CFOs really vary. And for background, the first 10 years of my career that I spent in sales, I spent in finance. I studied finance in college. Like, I like finance a lot. And I like CFOs, but they really vary in their go-to-market understanding. Some CFOs look at this and they say, like, hey, like, forecast out our revenue. And they're like, okay, well, like, 12 months ago, this month we did so much revenue, so I'm going to forecast we're going to do this much revenue this month. And there's other CFOs that are looking all the way down to how many leads do we generate? What is our lead conversion rate? They're doing weighted forecast. They're working with their sales leaders to do a ground up forecast. And what I was talking about with this planning is, are we doing bottoms up planning? Do we know exactly how many leads we can generate? Or are we saying, well, 5 reps closed this much last year, so 10 reps should close twice that much? Okay, well, did those 5 reps close everything by self-sourcing their pipeline, by doing outbound prospecting calls? And do we have twice as many people to call this year? Okay, great. If not, if those 5 reps like crush their quota off purely inbound leads, then what's your plan to double the number of inbound leads?
What I just don't believe. So let's just think about how is this going to play out? How is this going to get solved? What I have a hard time believing is that the CFOs, and you're right, some of them are absolutely there, but I have a hard time believing that all the CFOs will kind of wake up and suddenly get it and do this whole planning piece differently. But also at the same time, for you, do you think those are go-to-market chops that need to be introduced by the CRO or by revenue operations, or, who should be the responsible party to make sure that this actually ends up not being a problem in the organization?
Well, I mean, the buck stops with the CEO at the end of the day. Like,
yeah.
But also, I think it depends. I mean, I've worked with a number of CFOs, and their last job, they were an investment banker.
Yeah.
It's like, great, like super smart guy, went to Harvard, worked at Goldman, great. Okay, but at what point in your career did you go deep in the weeds and understanding like your lead generation and conversion rates? Like, I don't think Goldman teaches that in their onboarding program, in their analyst program, even if you covered technology. So I think that there are CFOs with varying degrees of experience and exposure to this. I did a couple of sessions with Ben, the SaaS CFO, Ben Murray, and he gets this stuff, Yeah. We can't shit all over every CFO. It just varies a lot.
Yeah. So I think this is like one of those big things, I think, where CFOs are still lacking, honestly. Because the thing is, they obviously get the spreadsheet right and all the accounting stuff, and they know how to structure around and so forth. But, when you think about it, and we had the same conversation with Ben actually as well, when you think about it, well, in your P&L, where's most of the money going? Where's most of the money actually going? And it's going to end up being in your sales and marketing. It's going to be in, cost of goods sold, right? CS. And do you actually have a good grasp of what's going on there, right? And the answer is, for many CFOs, is kind of no. Like, they don't actually know. And I think to a degree, what's happening in product development, it's really difficult to kind of grasp that, to understand that this is not that easy. But you would think that some of the sales and marketing math that all of us kind of extremely fluent in, that they would start to understand this thing and kind of actually see how sales and marketing should work and needs to work, and basically then help the company be more successful through it. I just have a hard time seeing this happening, actually. So, and this is where
I'm going to shamelessly plug your product here, okay? Because they would understand it if you showed it to them. But there's 2 problems. Number one, in Salesforce, it's very difficult to visualize this data. It's very difficult to see, like, we generated this many leads over this period of time. It either hit target or it didn't. It converted into pipeline in this way. The close rate was this. The sales cycle is this. You can spend an incredible amount of time, which I've personally done doing, and we've done for clients, like building all this stuff in these dashboards. And then you still don't have like a really clear picture. And then that's the technology and data piece. But then there's also this problem of definitions.
Yeah.
When we don't have a definition for a marketing lead, when we don't have a clear definition for what is a qualified sales opportunity, and our team isn't following that definition, then we go and we pull up these reports and we go, oh, wow, so our close rate's 14%. I guess our salespeople need to sell better. It's like, 14% doesn't mean anything. Like Bob over here takes every person he talks to and throws it in the pipeline. And Jane over here waits until like the thing's ready to close before she does it because she doesn't want to, get chastised for losing a deal. And so her close rate's 85%. By the way, these are real numbers I was looking at a couple days ago. Her close rate is 85% and Bob's is 14%. I'm literally looking at customer data like 6 days ago and seeing this. And it's like, okay, that's not like Jane is not 6 times better of a sales rep than Bob. This is a function of a lack of process.
And I'm just kind of pulling on this thread here a little bit. Would you say that some of the issues for a CFO to even, because they would get this. By the way, when we do a demo with a CFO, they, oh yes, totally get it. That's so super crystal clear. This makes sense. But do you think that for them to even get to this point, there's just a lot of cleanup and work that needs to be done on the go-to-market side to even create this, right? And I'm saying this, we've done, 20, 30-ish kind of rollouts, and it always starts with a funnel mapping. And this is usually where the implementation, starts to stumble a little bit. It's like, ooh, it's either we don't have any MQL definition or we have 5, right? And that kind of goes for many different steps. Actually, kind of some of that cleanup needs to be done first before you can instrument this with a product on top. Actually, kind of just to kind of build on your plug there. Do you see this similar in the companies that you're working at, that some of those basics are actually not in place, and therefore you can't instrument those basics?
All the time, most of the time. I would say though that you've got to work with the data that you have. So, for example, that particular customer that I'm talking about, that we just started working with in this way, I'm looking at it, and their overall close rate's 31%. And so I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say my hypothesis is one of two things. One, you guys are doing a good job closing deals, and this is not the thing that you need to fix first. Or two, you're doing a terrible job of closing deals. We just can't see it because your reps are sandbagging everything. Yeah. Now, we could then look and see, like, well, how much is pipeline generation? We could also just look like, are we hitting our sales target, right? If we're hitting our sales target and our close rate is 30%, well, then we're not generating enough pipeline. So then we can go look at that. Like, what's going on there? You can make meaning from dirty data. And some of this data makes its way all the way to accounting. So coming back to our CFO, we know how much revenue we've booked. We know what it cost us to book that revenue. We know how much we spent on marketing. We can figure some things out with accounting data as well, even if our CRM data is just complete junk.
Yeah. And I think there's and then
I was going to say, we can talk about the CFO for a long time. Like,
you know what, Mikkel, go ahead. I'll go back to...
And what I was thinking about now was like, so let's segue away from finance. So there's a gentleman called Jason
Oh, you
Lemkin.
got me excited.
No, I know. Sorry, Rockpool. So there's a gentleman called Jason Lemkin. And one of the things he says about companies that they're starting out is, you got to do outbound. You got to go and get that engine running, right? And I think especially now, we've talked about some of the challenges happening on the, let's say, the account exec side. We've talked about the challenge with routing inbound leads to junior folks. Outbound is also kind of under pressure at the moment. So it would be kind of interesting to hear your take right now. What are you seeing happening there? Some of the mistakes on running an outbound motion?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you need to do outbound. There's a lot of talk right now that you shouldn't do outbound under a certain ASP or ACV, right? And the idea behind this is, I don't care how junior a rep you hire. What's it cost for an SDR in the US these days? Like last time I looked, it's like $60K, $70K base, $20K bonus, add another 25% on top of that for overhead, all the technology and stuff. You got to have a person managing that person. And then there's an AE that actually has to close that deal. And then I don't care how great you are at outbound. It's really hard to do outbound without any marketing cover, without any assets or collateral. People are like, well, okay, who are you? Show me a customer story. Sales doesn't create customer stories. So there's a lot of cost that goes into that. And I think with the abysmal conversion rates that we're seeing in outbound right now, it's hard to justify that when you're selling a $10,000 product. That being said, the biggest problem that I see, and let's just talk about all pipeline generation, because I'm increasingly getting to the point where I'm like, why are we talking about inbound and outbound? It's the same effing thing. It's calling people that don't want to talk to you and trying to convince them to talk to you. So if we do want to talk about outbound, we're casting far too wide a net. We say, okay, our ICP is technology companies with more than $10 million in revenue. Okay, cool. There's 1 million of them. Great, that's it. And then our buyer personas are everyone in revenue, director and above. Okay, so now we've got like 100,000 people to call, and we've got a 5-person sales team, 15-person sales team, whatever. And we make all these calls, they don't convert, and so then we increase the call activity, and we go from 50 calls a day to 100 calls a day, or emails or whatever, and we just keep casting a wider and wider net. What companies are not doing is defining their ideal accounts well enough and narrowing that focus, because when you look at personalized outreach, when you look at reps that are going and doing all of the research, reaching out to the right person with a very thoughtful message that's targeted not at their industry, at the size of company they're at their role, at their type, and they really understand you as a human being in this job, in this company, are facing these problems. We have other customers facing these problems. This is how these customers solve those problems. And oh, by the way, the thing I'm selling helped them out just a little bit, because nobody has a technology on the planet that just does shit for you. I haven't seen it yet, okay? Your tool is wonderful, but if somebody is not willing to actually like look at the data, it doesn't just magically grow revenue by itself. And so what buyers want to hear are these relevant messages, and we're not getting that. And because they're not getting that, the conversion rates are lower. And so then management says, well, then we need to do more activity and cast an even wider net. And it's this vicious cycle. And instead, the companies that do this really well, they narrow their focus more and more and more, and to the point where they have these really strong conversion rates, and they're able to make an outbound program work by identifying the right accounts. But I will say it's expensive to do that.
Yeah. I think, I mean, in many times, on many cases, and yes, some of the growth at all costs is over, but still people are ambitious. People raise venture capital rounds, and you can't sit there for a year or 2 or 3 and build up, a podcast and some content and then wait for inbounds to happen, right? Kind of, it also doesn't work, right? So, I think outbound is very early in any kind of company's lifetime. I think it's the preferred, channel of choice, I would say, right? Because something else just hasn't been built up yet. But then also later, I think it's always a great way to, as an addition to some of the inbound stuff that's coming, that's maybe also a lot cheaper, right? But I think the issue is kind of continuously, so that it's like, man, it feels when you scroll LinkedIn that it's just over. It's like you can't do outbound anymore, and I just fundamentally disagree. I sometimes just don't have a good answer, and I actually think that kind of the point that you're making, it's really about building a targeted list, being just very good at that, right? And maybe even having this list being the same list that the SDRs are working on, but also that marketing is working on, right? Kind of creating that stuff. I think this is probably the smarter way to try and figure out outbound, because I think it can work, and I think it can be a really nice growth lever for a bunch of folks out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I always wondered why there was never truly a targeted effort between the outbound and inbound motion on, hey, this is what we're gonna do, right? The only point of conversation with any kind of SDR was actually the inbound SDRs, right? You didn't, at least I never spent a lot of time with the outbound SDRs, and looking back, that's kind of silly, right? We heard from Harrison Rose when they built Paddle, they had a great outbound motion, and they had a great ICP and a great target list. So when they brought in inbound, the first thing they did was target that list, and he was like, oh, great, you brought in people from the list we already have. That's kind of stupid. And he realized later, it's like, well, actually, that's exactly what we wanted to happen, right?
I don't think we should have separate inbound and outbound teams, like, period. Like, let's use 2 examples, right? So we've got example number 1. This is a company in our ICP and our buyer persona, maybe not the best company ever, but they fit. They could be a good customer. And the right person in the organization is just all over our website. They're downloading a ton of content. They're all over the pricing page. They're watching the demo on the website, which, by the way, I'm a big fan of. Like, why do you need to speak to sales to see a demo? But that's a different topic, which, yeah, you guys have that stuff on your website, which I love it.
Video. Mm-hmm.
That person's all over the website. Like, should we call that person? Probably. We probably should, right? Okay, separately, we've got this company, and they're just the perfect company. They check all the boxes. They are the number 1 company that we want to work with. Should we call that company? We should call that company. Okay, now let's take an account scoring model. How can we create an account scoring model to combine these two and just simply say, here's all the companies that fit our ICP, and these are all the indicators that these are the best possible companies for us. They just raised funding, they have this revenue growth, they have this headcount growth, like they have these particular issues. And then separately over here, we also have companies that are still within our ICP and people in our buyer personas that are engaging with our marketing content, or we have third-party content. All of this stuff is just signal, because none of these people that I'm talking about have actually gone to our website and requested a demo. That's a separate thing. So we've got all of these signals here, and we have a sales team we're paying a lot of money to. Why don't we just figure out who the sales team should be calling?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think we're kind of coming up on time real soon.
We are, and it's almost a shame because this particular subject just opens up a bazillion doors. But we kind of
I
also
wanted to talk more about the CFO.
Yeah, let's double back. No, but we have time for one last thing before we go. So I don't know if you wanna, or is there another
maybe
problem?
Eddie has a question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, could be you had a question, or is there a last point you think we should kind of spend the last couple of minutes on?
I have so many questions, but I guess I'll highlight the question that I think is most top of mind with your tool. How do you guys navigate this issue with this dirty data? When you guys are onboarding your clients and they don't have the definition of the MQL, and maybe they don't have a true revenue leader, what are you guys seeing that's working for the customers you're working with to help them sort of crack this nut of building this efficient go-to-market engine?
Yeah, so what we learned is that we're actually doing a mini consulting project just to kind of do the rollout actually. And those projects are basically, full funnel mapping. So, okay, how do you generate revenue? Just talk me through this, right? Okay, you have this inbound motion, you have this outbound motion, you have something else. Okay, how does the inbound motion work? How does it go from A to B to C and so forth? And, this is done, first in an overall, this is how this works map, kind of like a logic map. Sometimes it's like a RevOps leader or a CRO or VP sales or something like this, kind of working with us on this. And then we flip this around. It's like, okay, for every box that we have now defined, where in the systems do we find that stuff actually? And this is where the coin drops. This is where everyone is like, okay, actually, you know what? Actually, we don't know. And then, it's usually two kinds of problems. It's either okay, we just need to, decide a little bit on a technical definition, easy. The bigger problems are, oh, damn, I think we need to get the CMO in the room, we get VP of sales in the room, and we actually need to decide on this thing. And this is where then sometimes our implementation project, goes from an operational, hey, we just need to kind of do these things. It almost sometimes morphs into almost a strategic project. And yes, that screws us up, right? Kind of at least in the implementation time. But we're solving really big problems for people just by way of basically kind of getting the tool in the hand, actually. So that's how we're working through this. It's a very hands-on, white glove approach, actually, that you have to take, because otherwise, all of this, there are a couple of other folks trying to build in the same direction. They're kind of trying to make it, plug and play, or trying to make it self-serve. From what we have seen, it just doesn't work. You need to put in the hours to help your customer to get to the sophistication level, which is usually not that super high, in order to action that instrument on top.
That's what I've seen as well, and that's why I asked.
Yeah. I mean, those are things that, we're doing these things right now, but actually you should be doing those. You should be fixing the funnel. Give us a call when you did, and then we can come in.
Would be so much easier.
Or the other way around. You're like, this looks like an Eddie project to me, and then I have you go in first, and then we come with the product afterwards, right? But kind of those, I'm not sure that those actually kind of services you sell now that we've plugged our product. It's like
let's end with a plug.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's exactly what we do. And our teams are in conversation about this, right? And, I'm somewhat shamelessly plugging your product because we believe in it. What we are trying to do is to help a company be more data-driven and more process-driven, so that as they deploy capital, their CFO deploys capital, it goes in the places that are most likely to grow revenue and improve the customer experience. And you cannot do that if you can't get your hands around the data. And so, we spend so much time with our customers trying to fix these data issues. However, even fixing them and putting them into Salesforce, the visualization is really limiting. And so we're increasingly talking internally about can we bring grow blocks to every single customer that we work with? Because having that ability to just see it in one place and then move the dials around to see what's going into this is really, really powerful. But you've got to have the process in place to be able to achieve that. If anybody's listening to this and you want to understand like what are the components that go into like building this stuff, we have our revenue efficiency pyramid right on our website. And it talks about defining your ICP and your buyer personas and defining an MQL and defining your sales process. And we have a visual chart that shows you the order of operation of the things that you need to fix in order to have this reliable data so that you can build this more efficient revenue engine.
Yeah, that's it.
Eddie, thanks so much for setting the record straight on great pizza. Thanks so much for sharing a lot of go-to-market challenges and having this chat with us. Maybe this is not the last time we're going to hop on a call together and record it.
Right.
So much more we could hop into. Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and I hope everyone took something away here. Feel free to share it with some of your, your CFO friends and CRO friends, and tell them like, hey, listen, this is why we're having those issues, and I'm sure Eddie and Tony and Mikkel can help us with this. But otherwise, hit subscribe, like, follow, friend, share, whatever, and have a good one, folks. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.